Hello, everybody.
Good
morning. Yay.
Hello, hello.
Welcome back to day 2. We're glad to see you, and there's still some people flowing in, so take your seat, and we're going to get started pretty fast this morning.
Diving right into it. We have another packed schedule today, and we are excited to get started. So I see people filtering in. Let's hurry. Let's roll.
Oh, the doors are closing. Come in.
First up, we would like to introduce our keynote speakers for today. Jen Bennett is Director of Sustainability in Cloud, and Brian Sullivan leads Earth Engine Sustainability Solutions. So please please join us in welcoming them on stage.
Thank you. Woo!
Good morning. Where'd everybody go? I swear there was a little bit more people last time, but. So this is really exciting. I've been at Google for about 15 years, and I'm pretty lucky to have joined this team in the earlier stages when we were having our first versions of Geo for Good, and I had the illustrious task of laying down and breaking all the fire hazards and streaming the power strips together for the tables. And when I had joined the team, there was maybe, give or take, about 20 of us on Earth Outreach and Earth Engine. And there were about 50,000 people at Google at that time. Now, there's about 150,000 people at Google, and there's well over 100 people on this broader Geo for Every environment team. And that's a ratio showing that we are growing faster than Google. And the type of things that we're going to talk about today is really how our team is leveraging other parts of Google to become even more dedicated to these environmental and sustainability issues. And that's where I'm really excited to be welcoming Jen soon. Now, when I first joined, I didn't join on this team. I worked on some business intelligence work, and I did a lot of strategic partnerships. And at first, it was just fun to be at Google. But you get a shifting baseline thing. And after a while, it's not that exciting. And I was really struggling to stay driven for what it was, because I was spending all my free time working on environmental issues and going scuba diving for citizen science to measure and monitor the kelp forests off the area. But once I found out about Rebecca Moore's team, this team, I crushed hard. And I was willing to pretty much risk anything to get on that team. And so it was really exciting to actually be able to start spending my time on the most important things that matter to me at a personal level. And there was a folk legend, and I can't remember whether it was Woody Guthrie or someone else that had said, they asked him why he spent so much time dedicated to the environment when he was a musician. And he had said, when you're working on things around the environment, you don't always know if you're going to make the change, but you know you're working with the best people in the world around the most important things. And I think the community that we're bringing together today really proves that. And that's what gives me that energy time and time again. So yesterday during Rebecca's keynote, she talked about our pizza pie. And I think it's a great analogy in many ways. I have a few issues with it. One, nobody cuts pizza in fifths. It's really hard to do. You have to figure out 72 degrees, and there's some engineer calculating the radians behind that. But beyond that, I really feel fortunate that while I've been here, I've gone to work throughout that. Raleigh's team has brought me with the Maori groups in New Zealand or the Sherpas in Nepal so they could tell their stories. I got to work with some leading governments closely with Indonesia at the top ministerial and presidential level around fishing and how they could transform those areas. I got to work with United Nations in multiple areas around sustainable development goals. And my focus over the last year or two has been how do we bring in that private sector? Because what we know is that nonprofits and civil society, we can create incredible things. We can protest, we can bring awareness to things, but it's hard to drive direct action. We know governments, they can regulate, they can subsidize, they can punish, but we also know they get stuck in gridlock. Science and academia can bring new knowledge that we need to inform. We need them to make decisions, but they can't take action. The private sector was our missing piece on the team, and that is why we're moving there. It's not just about making money. It is the last lever we need to make the changes that we need to see in that world. And when we talk about markets, we usually say there's a few things that make them go round. The engineers say it's angular momentum and Kepler's laws. All the other hippies say it's love, and all the economists say it's markets. So I say, let's go get us some markets. And to do that, we have our sibling team over in cloud, where Jen Bennett leads sustainability for that. Now, I've been able to work with her for a little bit, and I'm so excited that we continue to grow our sizing within Google to really dedicate to these things. And believe me, she is of the same blood and the same passion. So Jen?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Brian. And it is really great to be here, and also a real pleasure to actually be presenting with Brian. One of the first times that Brian and I presented together, we had about the same amount of time, about 30 minutes. And I said to Brian, I said, hey, how about, we kind of split the time? Yeah, no worries. He goes, yeah, that sounds great. I said, great, just throw a few slides in the deck. And he goes, oh yeah, I got lots of stories, I'll do that. The next time I pulled up the deck, there was over 100 slides. I was like, okay, Brian, this time, how about we keep it to 10?
I don't have a single slide in this deck, for the record.
Anyways, all jokes aside, I mean, the work that Brian and the whole team and everyone in this room has been doing over the years has really inspired us all. I think this community has taken Earth observation, geospatial analytics, and AI to a whole new level, and really one that's critically important for our future. Several years ago, I attended an internal Google Summit on sustainability, and I vividly remember Karen and Salim coming and presenting on the work that Geo4Good had been doing, around air quality, Environmental Insights Explorer, and a whole bunch of other things. And at the time, I had just wrapped up work around IoT and AI, looking at things like water and energy efficiency, waste reduction, a whole bunch of these types of topics. And I became really inspired to start thinking about how could cloud have a bigger impact on sustainability with our customers. And so I started to really digging deep into this. And maybe you would say my timing was serendipitous. But 2 weeks earlier, Larry Fink from BlackRock had just published his letter to the CEOs talking about purpose and responsibility for organizations. And roll the clocks forward a year, he then weaved in this idea of how important climate change was to that purpose and sustainability for businesses. So this really got me thinking, how could we leverage this momentum? Now, I would say Google has a long history of sustainability, primarily because of our founders and our leaders and folks like the Geo4Good organization, Rebecca and Matt and Tanya and Karen and Brian and so many more. And so as we started to think about, what could we do around sustainability, we really realized, and this was right around the time when we were embarking on our third decade of climate action, we started to think about our strategy for the next decade, and it was going to be around 3 pillars. The first pillar was really to continue leading at Google in our sustainability efforts, and we took some really ambitious goals around carbon-free energy 24/7, net zero, and a whole bunch of others across our business. The second pillar was really focused on how can we empower our partners and our customers to leverage technology to help them with their sustainability goals. And then the third pillar was really how do we leverage the platforms that we have the privilege of serving billions of users to help them make more sustainable choices. So our talk today is really going to focus in on that second pillar and how we're building technology to enable others. Now, Geo4Good has had a long history in this space, empowering researchers, academics, NGOs, policymakers. And now when I think about this decisive decade ahead of us, really starting to turn the focus and how clear it is, as Brian said, that these commercial entities and the role that they play in climate action is really pivotal. Now, the good news is we have a lot of tailwinds on our side. CEOs and boards around the world have sustainability in one of their top 3 priorities now. That's great news. There's been an acceleration of policy changes. We've seen over 225 new or revised policy instruments just from 2020 to 2021. That's about a 50% growth year over year, and it keeps accelerating. We also continue to see that the world of the financial world, so ESG assets are expected to be on the order of 53 trillion by 2025. That's about a third of all projected assets under management. We know that consumers continue to prefer sustainable products, even despite this economic headwinds that we're facing. And employees are putting increasing pressure on their employers. In fact, we've seen that over 65% say they would more likely work for an organization that had strong environmental policies. Now, I spend a lot of time looking at technology and how technology can enable these global sustainability efforts for a number of organizations. I am particularly excited about the power of geospatial analytics. In 2016, I was very fortunate to be able to go and see the SpaceX launch for Jason 3. I don't know how many of you remember this program. Jason 3 was really focused on supporting scientific, commercial, and practical applications related to sea level change, ocean circulation, and climate change. Now, coming off of the historic Hurricane Ian, I think we all can be reminded how critically important these satellite programs are for our understanding and for our adaptation. But since then, since 2016, we continue to see this proliferation of satellites. It has almost tripled in just 6 years. Now, I know I probably don't need to convince this audience how important Earth observation is for sustainability, but we continue to see a growing interest and need with commercial entities focused on how does their business impact the environment, but also how the changing environment is impacting their business. And so this is really what we're talking about. Businesses demanding more timely information, global information, and with higher precision. So it became apparent to several of us, I would say many of us, that bringing Earth Engine to our commercial customers and better integrating with cloud capabilities would really help accelerate our customers' ability to tackle their sustainability goals, but also help us to advance our collective action. So as I mentioned, Google Earth Engine has had a long history. We can go back to 2014 when Global Forest Watch was launched, really empowering and enabling everyone to help protect the forests around the world. We also have been able to see government agencies like US Forest Service now take advantage of the platform as well to help them with their mission around sustaining the health, the diversity, and the productivity of the nation's forests and grasslands. And now we're also seeing commercial entities like Unilever. As part of our 2022 commercial strategy, our focus continues to be both on mitigation and adaptation, and we're going to focus first on mitigation. Enterprises like Unilever have really complex supply chains that are global in nature, but also multi-tiered. And so being able to get the transparency necessary to understand their impact to the environment has been quite challenging. But now being able to bring procurement information, internal procurement information that is, along with all of this environmental insights, is helping them really transform their operational decision making. But instead of me standing up here talking about it, I think, Brian, you're going to go and show us this in action.
Sure. So when Jen and I kind of agreed that we'd be doing this presentation, one of the things she said is, okay, but we're not doing slides. This has to be live. And now that I know her little joke about the fact that I brought 100 slides to the table, maybe this is all making sense. Now, there's an expression in Texas that says somebody can be all hat and no cattle. And what that means is that they have a lot of bluster, they talk a big talk, but they don't really show anything. And so to that end, we have spent last night and the morning praying to the demo gods, because this is a live demo of NGIS's Tracemark. This is something that is in development and is constantly evolving. We found some bugs along the way, but that is the power of Geo for Good. It forces us to get in there and make everything presentation ready. The idea is this is taking some of the work that was done from Unilever and making it more broadly available as a process that other companies can use that want to have commitments in their supply chain around no deforestation, around other commodities. And so this is an early look at how we're starting to see this for palm. So when we talk about palm, it's a very contentious commodity. If you are following kind of Greenpeace and some of their heavily advertising, there's a lot of people that are really telling you to avoid palm. But there's some things you should know about it. About half of all your consumer packaged goods have some palm oil in them. And if you were to replace those oils with the next closest thing, something like soy, you're going to need 7 times the amount of land. And so it's not that palm is evil. It's actually one of the most efficient and best ones for it. We just have to figure out how to manage it in a sustainable fashion and work with what we have and use that efficiently. Some other facts about it: it also employs over 4.5 million people just in Indonesia and Malaysia. And so the idea of kind of stopping all that, these are real livelihoods. There's about a 50-50 split between large-scale industrial plantations of it and smallholder farmers. And when we get into those smallholder farmers, those are in many cases indigenous groups that own that land. And we want to make sure they have equal access to the market, and it is not done entirely by large-scale ones. And finally, where it comes from in the world, we're looking at a lot of the world here. About 85 to 90% of it is coming from Indonesia and Malaysia. And so now let's take a look at if I was a buyer and I wanted to understand how does my supply chain work as it relates to palm. Now, for the remote sensing experts out there, I am not going to show you anything today that will blow your socks off, because the reality is the academics and the research people have laid the foundation for this, and you have done the heavy lifting, and most importantly, you have made it scientifically credible. Because when an organization and a company stands up there and says, I built my palm model, and it says I'm all good, nobody's going to trust them. And that's why we need all those pieces of the pizza working together. So let's take a look at where these concessions land. So what NGS has done is given us a view into the way we could look at our own supply chain. We have some data in here that was public and we brought in, and there's other data that a company would have themselves about where they source from and how these are linked. So the first thing we're looking at is the actual deforestation by year since 2016. Now, 2016 is an important year in the world of palm, because that's when companies started saying that they would take responsibility for some of their own reporting on palm. And many of them made what's called an NDPE, no deforestation, no peat, no exploitation around that. All sounds like great things. And the idea is we will start reporting in 2016, and many companies have said the deforestation has to end by 2023. And then we will work with the land that is already palm, but we don't want to be converting additional native forests to palm. And so we can see that it was at its peak in 2016 for that. It's come down a bit. COVID may have helped this slowing. We see a small uptick, but this is what we're watching. And so as we scroll down here, the way Tracemark is set up is we see the different levels of a supply chain. A concession is the actual land that we're growing these plantations on. Now, palm oil, when it's harvested, needs to be processed quickly. And so therefore, you have to go to a mill where that seed is crushed. And from a mill, we generally go to a facility where these are going to be processed a little bit more. And from there, eventually go to a factory where it gets made into your favorite bars and everything else like that. And so we want to be able to follow that step by step. So when we're looking at concessions here, I can come down, and we can see while much of it is here, we also have it in Ecuador, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Honduras, and many other ones. And so it is grown throughout the world, but we'll focus on the region in the Pacific. So let's filter this by Malaysian companies. And then let's sort this by the amount of deforestation we're seeing in that area. And so let's go to this particular concession here. And so now on the right, we have various tools. And so that's going to be a little hard to see. So we'll go into a map view. So let me situate you to where we are in Malaysia. Always look for the little monster at the end. We're at the eye of the monster right in here. Now, next to that is the Taban Wildlife Resort. This is actually the largest resort or protected area in all of Malaysia. And so we're right on the border there. And so as we come into this, we can see from the side how deforestation has happened within that concession. And we can see it spiking in 2018. And let's turn on what type of deforestation has happened in the surrounding areas. And I have my date set from January of 2017 through the end of 2019. Now there's another incredible group that made something called Dynamic World. And so they brought that in, and what we're doing now is we're looking at how has the land within that concession changed over these years. And here we're doing these as annual pieces. Now, as you can see, initially, most of this area within that concession, there really wasn't palm back in 2016. Now, for the Dynamic World experts, you may say palm is not a category in Dynamic World, and that is true. But our good friends at NGIS took palm layer masks, and they worked that in there to add it as an additional one. So what we can do now is we want to understand, remote sensing has said that this area is being deforested, but we're trying to move and create maps to actually have communications with people. It's not just about catching the bad guys, it's about enabling other people with tools to understand how these are changing and map as a visualization and a communication technique. And so what we want to do now is bring in imagery from Planet Labs. They did a program where their satellites scan every part of the world at a daily level. From there, they've made monthly mosaics that they've made available, and Norway has funded so that it can be used for free for anything related to climate change and stopping deforestation. And so what we've done now is I've loaded the mosaic from June and from December, and we have our little slider bar so I can see how this area is changing before and after. And so what I can come in here is take a good look at this deforestation section, what's projected or predicted based on remote sensing. And I'm just going to turn down the opacity on that so we can see a little bit better. And now we will come through, and this was the world before, and this is it afterwards. Let me turn off the deforestation so you can see a little bit better. And so these type of visuals that anybody in the field that can have a real conversation with these groups are very empowering. And the idea is that historically, a lot of palm was done through certification, meaning somebody else has said this is fine, and therefore I'm just going to buy it. But we know there's lots of problems with certification. And what this is enabling is anybody on that buying side to be doing this through verification, where they get to see it with their own eyes, with their own analysis, and then that becomes the communication tool. And we think that is a much more sustainable and collaborative way of addressing these issues. Now, another thing that we're seeing off of this is the area that we're growing it, but what do we do with the palm afterwards? And so we showed one area where we saw a lot of deforestation. And so now we want to go back and let's find another one that maybe is in a different situation. So we'll go back here, and this time we will sort, by where we see less deforestation. What happened here? And we'll go to this one. Now we're in a different region, and what we're seeing is, while the graph can look scary, the amount of hectares that have been detected as deforestation are, a tenth of a hectare. And so we're considering that within the noise for these things. And the other thing that's very exciting is we can see how good is the palm mask in these areas. Oh, that was on the last one. So we can see that there's palm and all of this yellow area, but not down at the bottom. So let's look at the underlying Google imagery. And this is the satellite, the high-resolution satellite. This is the creme de la creme. This is higher resolution than Planet there, but we don't get it as frequently. And if we turn off that palm mask, we can start to see the difference. And after playing in this area, you really get to see this is what a palm plantation looks like. Very regular trees with that star pattern on them, versus this is native forest in there. And that palm mask hit that exactly, or very close to when we kind of assume what resolution we're really working at or what we could work from. And then finally, let's take a look at what happens with this after we've gathered it. So now we're going to turn on the production layer where we can see the mills and the facilities. And I'm going to click up. First, we can zoom in. In this case, we can show that that concession is linked to this mill. And you can see, and it's on Google Maps right there, that this is the mill where things are crushed. And this is a larger scale mill. And you can get a good sense of what's in there. But if I click on it, I can now get all the details for that mill. And there's a few things that we're seeing right away. We have the owner, we have the address and areas like that, but we also have an upstream and a downstream. And the other thing that we have here is that circle in the middle is kind of traditionally how people would estimate where we sourced palm from. The idea being that we didn't really know, and we said, well, it's probably within about 50 kilometers, because after you pick the fruit, you want to process it quickly. And so they basically drew a big circle, and if you were in that circle, we might have sourced from you, and if you were outside of that, probably not. But that wasn't terribly accurate. And so what we have in the pink area is what's called an isochron. This is the methodology that's existed in retail forever. And what it allows us to do is look at the road network and see where are people traveling. And so if there's a massive river, or there's a big cliff, or there's really, really thick forest, and there's no way to get through that, then the isochron will calculate that based on the road network, how big of a truck you can get on there, and we're getting much more accurate pieces. And so while this methodology has been around for a while, we're now making this available as an industry best practice in these areas, and the initial feedback has been very strong for that. We can look at one or two other isochrons that we have up here, where you can see the roads are coming down the edge here. We can see everywhere that they'd be sourcing from in that area versus that circle. And here you can really begin to see what that road network looks like inside, as well as getting statistics about how much do we think we may have been over or underestimating in the past when we were just doing the circle method. We have that data here as well. Now, this is an example of one of the areas that we did not see any deforestation. And what we can see is that this mill is not RSPO certified. And a lot of companies have historically said they would only buy certified materials. But this is an example of a mill in an area that has very good practices, but is having trouble reaching that market. And so this verification technique also gives new access to people doing the right thing for big companies to buy from. And that's something we're also really excited about.
Great.
So,
No, thanks, Brian. That was great. We mentioned before that mitigation is critically important, and so a lot of this work is really towards how can we proactively mitigate. But also important is adaptation and resilience. You know, businesses are increasingly becoming more concerned about the risks associated with the physical effects of climate change. Things like heat waves, floods, droughts, fires, water stress, all of it, many more. It can damage buildings, we can have transportation issues, it can drive the cost of materials and supply and labor and a whole variety of other issues. And most organizations don't really have the tools necessary to be able to assess the risk and therefore expose themselves to potentially business disruptions and often a lot of cost. And so what we're starting to see is this real need for businesses to be able to better assess the risk associated to their businesses and be able to put mitigation and resiliency plans in place. So Brian, hand it back over to you to give us a demo of that.
So this is a small piece that our strategic partners, Climate Engine, have put together. Now, we've been working with them back in the nonprofit days. They did a lot of help on some of our sustainable development goal work with the United Nations, but they are really starting to build out deep expertise and building out the team to bring some of the world's leading remote sensing scientists next to people that are really comfortable working in a business environment. And their specialty is going to focus on more and more of this climate resilience and how do we really make not just long-term projections, because we have a lot of people working on those, and the reality is long-term projections, the error bars get really big out there. We don't know what to do with that when you're saying, great, in 30 years, we're basically fully screwed. What do I do now? And so their focus, and in many of these cases, is saying, let's not just look over the long term. Let's say, what are the operational decisions that we need to be making in the next day or two, the next week, the next quarter? And this is where remote sensing really brings a lot of value to it. So being able to look at all the environmental factors in an area, as well as that geospatial locations, really shifts things. And as Jen was saying, a lot of companies don't know where their assets are. So being able to help them find climate impacted and severe weather events, which we know are only getting larger and more frequently, how does that affect their assets and what should they be doing? Now, they have some incredible clients, but those clients don't always want me on stage talking about that. And so we don't get to show you those. And a lot of the work they do is really strong APIs in the back end, because companies say, I don't want you to fill me a full stack solution. You have to integrate this into my operations. That's the whole point of this. And so a lot of this is just those APIs in the background. But they have graciously mocked up kind of an example of what things could look like in this way. And so here is the electric lines for the United States. And we're zooming in on the West Coast, where fires are a real issue. And what we can see here, this is September 6th to begin. And as we move forward to September 14th here, this is going to see all these hexagon areas. Where are we at? All right, so let's go in. And this is the mosquito fire near Tahoe. And as I zoom in on that area, they have dug through firms and VIIRs and the multitude of fire-related ones to figure out how can they get a scientifically valid version of where that fire is and show the intensity of that. And these green lines around it are all the electric lines that are in that area. And the closer they are to the fire and where the fire may be moving, the more and more these are being colored. And the idea is, if you have a limited supply of trucks that can go out there to try to cut back on vegetation, if you have to preemptively turn off the power lines beforehand, or if you're saying we can't create other sparks, an Earth Engine's really good at looking at all the environmental data to say, what are the fuel loads? How much vegetation is in the area? How much grass is in the area? How often has it rained in the past? We can identify where we're at the highest risks, and people can then make those decisions. Now, there's a lot of conversation we've been having with other supply chain people, and there's some groups that have done a lot, and this is a similar network to what trains might use. And again, we don't need the most powerful thing, because what we've heard from some of these leading train companies is, here is our fire monitoring technique. We have a person that keeps his head outside the train, and when they see smoke, they call in advance to try to understand what that is. And that is a real thing. And so being able to move that forward just a little bit really changes the entire game for them. And so we're seeing this happen a lot more in supply chain areas, and we really see financial services as an area where if the market starts to adjust for these climate risks, we hope that's the lever that we need. Jen?
Great. So I think Brian touched on this, but when I talk to customers, they're really eager to understand how we can bring the science and the research that many people are doing in this room to operational impact. But as many of you know, these organizations don't have deep geospatial expertise. So we really rely on the community. We rely on the community of partners, many of whom are in this room today, and hopefully many other potential partners in the future. It goes without saying that a sustainable future really requires collective accountability and collective action. And this community has really formed to help tackle some of our most challenging and pressing challenges that we face. I really hope that this community can continue to innovate, to inspire, and to help transform our future together, which includes a number of these commercial entities. Thank you very much. And with that, I think we hand it back to Karen and Mike.
Yeah, Michael, okay.